the...
That's the one. 2, 2, 3, 3, and 3, 4. Yeah, there's only 4 bars going on. Yeah, it's all right. I'm just gonna grab a different microphone then.
There, right there.
Three, 5.
Yep.
Find it?
I'm missing one.
Max, can you find, can one of you guys find 3, 2 and plug it into your left of the one I plugged in?
That one.
What are the 2 different mics for?
One's for her that she needs right now. The other one is for questions at the end.
So you're gonna hold on? I'll get full. Say one more.
And then your teacher will bring you to the auditorium for our presentation. Again, the bell will ring at 9:20.
What are the 2 different mics for?
One's for her that she needs right now.
11 and 12. Attendance will be taken, and you will be brought to the auditorium. Teacher, check your email. The presentation is virtually for grades 9 and 10, being done through the YouTube announcements link, but there's also a backup link in each email at your time. Have a great day.
One's for her that she needs right now. I want to see what that looks like. Why did I close that?
You just go over the top here. I just want to shift to it.
This one?
Yeah.
It's not muted, right?
Shouldn't be.
Okay.
Well, I unmuted it from Kevin.
Okay.
Talk.
Okay.
My time is up.
Come on, Jay, do better. Is it working?
I don't think I need to.
Okay, you're going to do an introduction, right?
Yes.
Oh, keep talking.
Keep talking.
what is she gonna be doing with that microphone then?
What are you talking about?
All right, so we have an opportunity today, if I could just have everyone's voices down and up here. We have an opportunity today to have a speaker present for you all. The entire school, grade 9 and 10, are being, this is being streamed virtually for them. But this whole week is about wellness and mental health. Elizabeth O'Neill is a speaker who's gonna come talk to you about her experiences, what she went through and how she came out of those experiences in a way that has been productive and positive in her life. I'm gonna give the mic to Ms. Canty. She's gonna give a little bit more of an introduction. Ms. Canty is our advisor for student council. And then Elizabeth O'Neill is gonna get right to her speech. So do me a favor, make sure our phones are away and make sure we're giving our speaker respect like I would expect out of you. Everyone clear with that? Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to our Wellness Week presentation. This year, our guest speaker is from Minding Your Mind, which is a caring and resourceful organization when it comes to some of the issues and obstacles that we are facing today. It is my pleasure to introduce our dynamic and courageous speaker who has traveled all over the country for Minding Your Mind, speaking to audiences about changing minds, stories over stigma. It involves various topics related to depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. Okay, so if you could please join me in welcoming our speaker, Elizabeth O'Neill.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know most of you probably didn't have a choice to be here, but thank you anyway. I really appreciate you all being here. So today I'm going to be sharing my story of mental health, mental illness, and recovery. This is my personal story, so I'll be sharing with you some of the feelings and thoughts that brought me into some of the places I ended up in my life. But I'm really going to try to focus on sort of how I moved through these things. I will be talking about some stuff, though, that can be hard to hear. It can trigger an emotional response for some people. So I want to let you know right up front what those things are going to be, because I won't be giving individual content warnings or trigger warnings as they come up today. So as like a blanket statement, today I will be talking about, like I said, some things that can be hard to hear, including depression and anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, suicide, and substance use. I know that's a lot to throw at you at 9:30 in the morning, but if something feels like it's too much for you to take in, please feel free to take care of yourself in whatever way feels best. If that's like ignoring me for a few minutes, if that's going and finding a teacher or a coach or an adult in the building that you need to talk with, if that's going to the bathroom, please take care of yourself. All right, I think that's it for like pre-presentation things. We're gonna save some time at the end for questions. So if anything does come up that you wanna ask about, that you're feeling curious about, please feel free. I'm open to hearing whatever sorts of feedback you all have to give. But I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. I grew up in a family. I'm Elizabeth, by the way. My pronouns are she, her. I know you heard that, my name before. But I'm here today for Minding Your Mind, a mental health organization. And the goal of Minding Your Mind, as you also kind of heard, is to break down the stigma that still exists around mental health. So here's my story. I grew up in a family, possibly like many of you all, where there was a lot of love. There was also a lot of chaos. The chaos came from a bunch of different directions, but the main form of it for me as a young kid came from the fact that both of my two younger sisters are what doctors call medically complex children, which just means they both had multiple severe/chronic medical conditions that required a lot of care, a lot of attention, a lot of hospital visits. But the nature of their medical conditions was also such that there was a lot of uncertainty. Doctors didn't really understand what was going on with them very well. So the uncertainty meant that sometimes we would find ourselves in the emergency room in the middle of the night. And I did not do well with this uncertainty at all. But I was the physically healthy child. I was also very much the one that the adults in my life didn't have to worry about. Part of this is because I was physically healthy, but part of it was also like just who I am as a person. I've always been a control seeker. I've always been a people pleaser, a perfectionist. So like I said, the adults in my life made it very clear that they were relieved they didn't have to worry about me. I tried really hard to project this image of kind of perfect Elizabeth. I felt that the expectation was that I was happy, healthy, and high achieving, and I really internalized that. It got to the point where I was sort of wearing a mask. I like to describe it as like this mask of perfect Elizabeth, and I was terrified to take that mask off. Perfect Elizabeth is like definitely not what was going on internally for me though. I already mentioned I didn't do well with uncertainty. I also worried all the time about big things like my sister's health, my parents' stress, but also about small things like the fact that my friend hated me because she smiled at me differently this morning, or the thing I said wrong in class last week. I worried all the time. I was also having difficulty concentrating in class, difficulty sleeping. I was really, really rigid. I had a really hard time being flexible. And when this order that I craved wasn't achieved or when it was disrupted, it really set me off in a way that didn't make sense to a lot of the people around me. I now know that these are all kind of classic symptoms of anxiety. The biggest of these that I was experiencing at the time is this thing that I've always called my mental tape. You may have heard this referred to as intrusive thoughts, racing thoughts, negative thoughts. I have always called this my mental tape, and I like to describe it as my mind moves at a pace and with a pressure that oftentimes feels really out of control. So I know now that I have depression, I have generalized anxiety disorder, and I have obsessive compulsive disorder. If you're not familiar with any of these diagnoses, I'm going to give you like a quick one-sentence summary of each. Depression is a prolonged period of sadness that deeply impacts your ability to do your normal activities. Oftentimes there's like a loss of interest in things you used to be interested in. Sometimes there are physical changes in sleep or diet. Generalized anxiety disorder is exactly what it sounds like. It's general anxiety. It's not specific to any particular situation or circumstance. And then obsessive compulsive disorder is, I think, the thing I like to talk most about, because we think about it as applying to people who are maybe super organized or clean. And that can be a part of some people's OCD, but it's really about obsessions, which are these loud and constant and racing and persistent thoughts, and compulsions, which are the things that people like me with OCD feel like they have to do in order to lessen this with you now. The negative thought, diagnoses, the depression, the anxiety, the OCD. When I was in elementary school and I first started experiencing this though, I had no idea. I didn't have the language or the context or the background to talk about this. So all I knew about this mental tape was that it was incredibly disruptive, and so I tried all different kinds of things to get it under control. I tried to ignore the thoughts, I tried to give in to them, I tried to ignore them, distract from them, make lists of them, and nothing worked. But by the time I was in middle school, it was pretty clear to me that I was going to need to do something more. I was going to need to take more drastic measures because the mental tape was not slowing down. It was ramping up, it was getting louder, it was interfering more with my ability to do things. And it's around this time in 7th grade that I read a book about a girl who self-harmed. It was not a solution for her in this book, but I really felt like I had tried just about everything to get my mental tape under control, and I was willing to try just about anything else if it might possibly offer me even a small amount of relief. So when I started self-harming, I really hoped that this could be the thing, like that this could be the physical interrupter that my mental tape, my racing thoughts needed. Looking back, I can see pretty clearly that even though the self-harm and the reasons for it seemed to make sense to me at the time, it wasn't a solution to my problems, any of my problems. It didn't help me feel more in control, didn't reduce my anxiety, did nothing positive for my mental tape. But even when I saw that it wasn't working, I had kind of a hard time getting myself to stop. This is where I'm really lucky that I had some great friends who noticed things weren't going super well for me. So they talked to the middle school guidance counselor, and obviously I found out that they had done this because I was called down to the middle school guidance counselor's office shortly after. And when I found out, I was so pissed because They betrayed me. I felt so hurt. I felt so upset. But I didn't stay upset for long. It was probably a week and a half, if that. First of all, I needed friends to survive. It was middle school. Second of all, it didn't take me long to realize that they had done for me what I probably would have done for them if I were in their shoes. When we care about someone, we want to help them. They didn't have the tools, the resources, the skills to be able to help me in the way that I needed. So they connected me with someone who could. They went to the best person they could have, the guidance counselor, someone specifically trained to help young people in mental health crisis. So like I said, I ended up kind of getting over being mad at them, and it ended up being a really good thing for me. This was the first time ever that I got into therapy, first time I got professional help for my mental health. And therapy was wildly uncomfortable at first, like really uncomfortable, which makes sense, right? I had spent 12, 13 years keeping all of my feelings in, and now someone was telling me to let them all out. But it got less uncomfortable. It got less uncomfortable, mostly with time, as I gave it a little more time. But also as I started to hear what my therapist had to say. And one of these big messages she had for me was, it's okay to not be okay. Has everyone heard that before? Just raise your hand if you have or not or something. Yes. Great. It looks like almost everyone is raising their hands. That's fantastic. I've heard it a ton more in the past few years than I think in my entire life put together. And that's great. But when I was in 7th grade in therapy for the first time and I heard my therapist say this to me, it was the first time I had ever heard it. The first time an adult had ever explicitly said to me that was a thing that was okay. And intellectually, I understood this. I said, yeah, it's okay for some people to not be okay. But it didn't feel like that was an okay thing for me. That was kind of the goal of therapy at this point, was to kind of reassure me that all of the feelings I had, even the ones that I convinced myself were not okay, were in fact very real and legitimate and needed to be felt. That was really important work for me at the time. But about 6 months into therapy, the insurance company called. They said, you've hit your maximum number of sessions, whatever. I think we're ready to discontinue services unless there's an absolute necessity. And the adults in my life kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, no, things are going really great with Elizabeth. She seemed great before therapy. Now that she's in therapy, she still seems great. So I think she's done. She's good. The problem, of course, was that I had gotten so good at wearing this mask of perfect Elizabeth that, of course, I seemed great throughout all of these experiences. I did stop going to therapy, and things were okay. I wouldn't say great, but things were okay for a period of time. But the real value of therapy for me had been that it was this safe space for me to kind of let that mask come down a little bit. It was a safe space for me to share some of my feelings. One of the only spaces in my life where I felt like I could do that. So in the absence of this space, when the racing thoughts, the overwhelming feelings came back up for me, I didn't have a place to put them. So I just kind of tried to manage them in the way that I always had, by trying to gain control over everything around me. If you were on the outside looking in, you might think I was doing a pretty good job with this. You might look at me and say, Elizabeth has got things under control. She's the captain of the middle school track and field team. She's getting all A's in her honors classes. She's got some friends. She's doing her extracurriculars. Things look pretty great, under control. But it wasn't enough for me. It wasn't enough for me, I know now, because it will never be enough for me. I am the kind of person who says, once I get these things, I'll be happy. And then I'll get these things, and I'll need more. I didn't know that at the time, though. I thought if I just had a little bit more control, things would be better. Everything would resolve itself. So I turned the control inward through diet and exercise. I didn't realize until it was too late that in trying to control my body, my eating had become disordered and restrictive, and my exercise had become excessive and compulsive. I'm going to break that down just a little bit. When I talk about my eating being restrictive, I was restricting what and how much I was eating. When I talk about it being disordered, my relationship with food was no longer healthy or even neutral, every interaction with food was emotionally charged. I had developed a really real fear of food and eating. When I talk about my exercise being excessive, I was exercising too much. When I talk about it being compulsive, even though I was exercising too much, it didn't feel like enough. Whenever I wasn't exercising, that was all I could think about, and I felt so guilty for not exercising. So all of this, the disordered restricted eating, the excessive compulsive exercising, all the lying, the trying to cover it up I was doing, I thought it was all a big secret. Again though, it turns out that people around me noticed, even before I did, that something wasn't quite right. My friends noticed physical changes in me. They also noticed behavioral, social changes in me. I was even more rigid than I had been before, which is saying a lot. I have always been like a painfully rigid person. I was withdrawn from them. Some of the stuff that I had loved doing with them before, I was no longer interested in. And significantly, I was revolving a lot of my existence around these pretty strict rules and rituals I had set for myself around eating and exercising. My parents noticed all of this too, so they brought me to the pediatrician, and she referred us to a nutritionist, a psychiatrist who could prescribe medication, and a therapist who all specialized in eating disorders, which is probably along the lines of what you were expecting, given the heads up I gave you at the beginning, given what I've been talking about for the past couple minutes. But when I found out that we would be seeing an eating disorder specialist, honestly, I was shocked. I was also like beside myself. I was furious because I had these voices in my head telling me I couldn't possibly have an eating disorder. These voices in my head were telling me I couldn't possibly have an eating disorder because the things that they're calling eating disorder, the restrictive eating, the over-exercising, those are things I need. Without them, I'm out of control. Without those things, I am nothing. At this point, when I'm sharing my story, I say, I totally get if this sounds weird. If you've never had an eating disorder, you might be looking at me talking about these voices in my head and think, this is different. But eating disorders aren't the only things that lie to us in our own voices. Maybe you've never dealt with the eating disorder voice, but I guarantee you, almost every single person in this room has experienced the voice of self-doubt or loneliness or depression or sadness telling you, no one cares about you. When your rational mind knows that's not true, there are people who want to support you. Maybe that doesn't feel right either. Maybe you've experienced the voice of worry or anxiety or fear telling you you should really freak out about this thing. Maybe you should even panic. When again, your rational voice can see that this thing is not a real threat. In this same way, my eating disorder lied to me, and that rational voice that every single one of us relies on got quieter and quieter and quieter for me. It got quieter because that rational voice really is only audible when our brains are functioning at full capacity. My brain was not. It wasn't getting the amount of fat, the nutrients that it needed to really run on, at the level it needed to be running. So my rational voice got quieter, the lies got louder, and soon that's all I could hear. All I could hear were these lies, and I really believed them. I believed them even as I received a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa, even as I was admitted to a hospital to be medically stabilized, and even as I went into treatment for my eating disorder. So I was in treatment for about 15 months, so there's a lot I could say here. But I'm going to focus on two big things today. The first is that my experience in treatment started in, like I said, a medical hospital. I then went to an inpatient program, which is where you're both living and receiving treatment in a hospital type setting. I then moved to programs with lower levels of care according to what my treatment team recommended. This is my journey, and that's all it is. It's my journey. You could find someone who had the exact same diagnoses as me, with a similar background as me, whose story of eating disorder recovery, mental health recovery looks completely different, and that's still a completely valid journey. Hospitalization was a part of my story. It was an important part of my story. I know I needed to be there and it was useful for me, but it's not for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. My hope in sharing my story is not that you all sit back and say, okay, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I did do this. I hope you don't sit and compare the specifics, but rather look to identify like where you can connect, where some of my thoughts, feelings do feel like they're maybe relevant in your life. The second thing I want to share about my time in eating disorder treatment relates to kind of the expectations I had for it. I don't know if any of you have ever seen like a TV show or a movie that depicts like a mental health treatment program. I've seen a bunch of them, and they're kind of usually depicted as these sort of quirky, whimsical places that are full of tragically beautiful people who are just misunderstood in the real world. And in these TV shows, these movies, oftentimes these beautiful misfits go into treatment and finally they belong. And they like fall in love, they make these lifelong friendships, they do a lot of arts and crafts. That was not my experience of treatment, which again is not to say that that's not some people's experience. But when I think of my time in treatment, I think of all the structure and supervision and rules and the fact that everything was a privilege. More than any of that though, I think about how difficult it was. It was hard work. It was really hard work to do recovery. That's something I almost never see fully or accurately depicted in pop culture. It's hard work to move through the feelings that bring you into treatment. It's hard work to learn different behaviors. It's hard work to choose recovery. I put in that work, and so like I said, 15 months after I went into treatment, I was ready to be discharged. Not because the work stopped, but because it changed. My needs changed, the work changed. So I had been out of school and in treatment for what would have been my freshman year, my first year of high school. And I was set to start high school as a sophomore in late October. I think now there's a lot of programs that help students who've been in treatment kind of transition back into school or into school. This was not really the case when I was in high school, or at least in my school. There was no sort of transition program. And I didn't really have a lot of supports in place. So I showed up to high school for the first time as a sophomore at the end of October. And I found that when I had gone into treatment, the world had continued to turn. This was shocking to me. People had moved on with their lives. They'd enjoyed a summer. They'd made their way through freshman year. They'd enjoyed another summer. They'd started sophomore year. I showed up and was just like completely lost. I had no idea where to begin. The things that the people around me seemed to be doing easily, I couldn't even, I had no idea where to start. It was completely overwhelming. It was exhausting, absolutely exhausting to try to keep up with this. I felt so lost, so alone, so lonely, and I got to thinking, there is no way it's meant to be this hard. Maybe the problem is me. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this life. Maybe it's not meant for me. Sometimes people are in pain like this extraordinary amount of pain, and all they can think about is getting out from under that pain. That's where I was mentally, emotionally. But because I was in such a dark place, getting out from under the pain and getting out of life altogether felt like one and the same thing. So when I was a sophomore in the fall of my sophomore year, I made a suicide attempt. This probably goes without saying, but I survived. Right, I'm here with all of you. When I realized that, though, when I woke up in an emergency room and realized I'm alive, I had a bunch of feelings, the most confusing of which was relief. That was like a weird feeling. Why am I feeling relieved? I learned that that's not actually unusual, though. Among people who survive suicide attempts, many of them cite feeling relief. It's not necessarily that they want to die. It's that we can't keep living in that pain. We have to change the way we're living. I'm really lucky because I got the chance to make that change. I say I'm really lucky because so many people, thousands and thousands of people do die by suicide each year. This is in the US alone. Suicide impacts thousands and thousands of young lives of people like you, me. It's a huge, huge issue. Not everyone gets to change the way they live. I did, but I really needed some help. So I went to treatment again. This time it was a 1-month program. It was a general psychiatric treatment program, so it was for anyone 12 to 17 years old with any kind of mental health challenge. And it was here that the focus for me became coping skills. Just something we've all probably heard a lot. I know, coping skills, whatever. I like to define them as the things I do on purpose to handle what's in front of me in whatever capacity I'm able. I'm going to give you a little example of this. I think of my anxiety on a scale, 0 to 10. When I'm like above an 8 with my anxiety, I can't use a coping skill like journaling, doing yoga. I'm way too anxious for that. My brain is moving too quickly. My body is all worked up. I have to use a different coping skill to address those feelings of high, what I call emotional activation. There's different coping skills for different situations. I use different ones depending on what I'm capable of. I learned in treatment that I had used coping skills for a very long time. I learned that hiding my feelings, isolating, self-harm, disordered eating, over-exercising, even the suicide attempt had been coping skills. They just hadn't been healthy, helpful, or good ones. Here, I learned some better coping skills. So I learned when I'm at that really high level of anxiety, I have to be able to get my body and my feelings and my thoughts regulated to be able to use a coping skill like journaling, for example. So I learned that in order to address that anxiety there, a great coping skill for me, this might sound a little weird, but is to put my face in a bowl of really cold water for 30 seconds. It's also effective to hold ice cubes until they melt, and this is a really cool skill because it works. Changing our body temperature, again, holding ice cubes, putting your face in really cold water. This activates our parasympathetic nervous system, so the part of our body that allows us to slow down. This literally triggers a relaxation response in our body, like our heart rates actually slow down. I think that's the coolest thing ever. It's a thing we can do fairly easily to help us with emotional regulation, because I don't know about you, but when my body is super worked up, I can't be emotionally regulated. Other ways of doing that, because I couldn't really walk around high school with ice cubes or whatever, deep breathing, that's another thing that we can use to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. Sometimes we need other things though. I learned for me, having creative outlets was really important. I learned that sometimes I need to remove myself from a situation, kind of take a walk. Sometimes I need to cry it out. Most importantly though, during this time, I learned when and how to ask for help. And that was really important for me. I'd never felt comfortable doing that before. I still don't think I would say that I felt comfortable doing so, but I definitely felt less uncomfortable asking for help. And I was able to use these helpful coping skills because I asked for support around implementing them. And I had a support network, my parents, my therapist, the high school nurse, a high school counselor, a teacher I trusted. It was because of these people, because of the skills I had worked hard to build, that high school went okay for me. The depression and anxiety were still there, so were the obsessions and compulsions. Definitely still dealt with the mental tape, but I had ways of coping with all of this. Now, I did go to college. I was really, really lucky to be able to do that. I wasn't sure that would be an option for me based on my mental health, but I went to college. And when I got to college, things changed. All of these helpful coping skills were still available to me, but I could not recreate the sense of structure and safety and stability I had had at home and in high school, where these things had been so effective. Additionally, I experienced a traumatic event in the first month of my college experience, and it really reduced my ability to function. It wasn't the first trauma I had experienced, but it was the first one I had kind of moved through without a safety net. And so the combination of this loss of safety and the trauma made it so that I didn't feel like I could use these helpful coping skills. I sort of rationalized, though, that that was okay because I developed a new coping skill. I started drinking. Now, drinking is something I never did in high school because I had this need for control and perfection, all that. When I got to college, I started drinking, and I found that when I drank, it was a reprieve, it was a break from the control I'd been seeking my entire life. It was a kind of out of control that didn't feel bad in the moment. And when I drank, my mental tape stopped, which was incredible. Because of what drinking provided for me, I was able to ignore all the red flags that came up. There were a lot of red flags that came up. From the beginning, I was a blackout drinker. From the beginning, I would inevitably wake up from a blackout feeling so much guilt and shame and self-loathing and regret that the best I could do to manage all of that was just start drinking all over again. Again, I was able to ignore these and some of the other red flags that came up because of what drinking provided for me. Also because I assumed that when I got out of college, my drinking would normalize. So I got out of college, and my drinking did not normalize. It got less and less manageable, and I found that I was using vacation time, sick time, personal time to recover from being hungover and get drunk all over again. I was getting hurt, the usual bruises, scratches, whatever, that come from a night out. More significant injuries as well, though. For example, one Tuesday morning, I woke up at 7 a.m. in the ER with a fractured skull, brain bleeding, a concussion, and no idea how I had gotten there. Turns out I had spent $50 on $5 cocktail night in the course of about an hour, and then I had been sent home and had fallen out of the Uber and cracked my head on the sidewalk. Things like this were happening more and more in my life, though. I was engaging in other risky behaviors, drinking and driving, going home with strangers, accepting drugs that were offered to me. Drugs did become a part of my life when I took a part-time job as a bartender, and I found that alcohol was not the only thing that made my mental tape stop. This brought me into a cycle of excessive drinking, abusing my prescription anti-anxiety medication, and abusing illegal stimulants. It was a cycle that I had a really, really hard time stepping out of. I found that I was losing things. I had lost a job. I was losing relationships. I was very close to losing an apartment. I had roommates who were not excited about this cycle either. And I was really losing my purpose, my sense of myself, and who I was as a person. So I tried to stop, and I found that I couldn't. It's around this time that a stop was forced upon me because I was arrested for an aggravated DUI. For those of you who aren't familiar, DUI is a criminal offense for driving. It stands for driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. An aggravated DUI happens when there's an aggravating influence present. I don't remember that evening, but the police report lists two for me. The first is that I was in a single car accident, which is a really nice way of saying I totaled a car. The second is that my blood alcohol content was over 2 times the legal limit. Mine was closer to 4, which means I definitely had no business driving. But if you have any idea what's going on physiologically in your body at that point, everything was impaired for me. Like I mentioned, I do not remember the evening. I don't remember the field sobriety test. I don't remember being handcuffed. I don't remember being booked. But I very clearly remember waking up in a holding cell thinking, what has happened here? I'm a people pleaser. I'm a perfectionist. I got really good grades in school. I came from a good family. I went to college. How am I here? None of those things protected me from mental illness or alcoholism or addiction. So I definitely had to, resolve all the legal issues that came up for me. People are often interested in what happened here, so I'll let you know I did have to serve what was a sentence that was given by the judge in my case, which was 14 days in jail. It's not something I recommend to anyone. Following that, I went to rehab for 60 days. And when I was done with that process, I had a choice. I could keep doing what I had always done, or I could really commit to changing my life. And I found that finally the pain of holding on to my self-destructive coping skills was greater than the pain of making a change in my life. So that's what I chose to do. It wasn't easy. I didn't get it right away. I tried. I stumbled many, many times. But I did a couple things right. The first is that I didn't give up. The second is that I used what I had learned from my previous mental health challenges to sort of inform my journey forward. I had learned that I have mental illness, but I can live with it. I can manage it. I had learned that self-help is super important, but I very much need professional help. Therapy and medication are critical for me. I have learned that I have people in my life who really want to support me, and I have to be able to be open to that support in my life. I did make some changes though, because like I said, some things definitely needed to change. And some of the things that I started to do are up here. These are still more or less the things I do now, because for me they work. I started participating in a peer support group. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of people who have gone through something similar, peers, who support each other on their shared journey. For me, my peer support group is people who are in drug and alcohol recovery. If you've ever heard of Narcotics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, that's the kind of group I belong to. And it is so empowering for me to participate in something like this, because every time I'm with members of my group, every time I'm in a meeting, I'm reminded that I'm not alone. Recovery is possible. It's a really, really powerful tool for me. I think peer support is important in all of our lives. Maybe for you, it won't be something formal and structured like AA or NA. Maybe it will be some friends who have experienced something similar to you that you can be really open and honest with. I also don't drink or use drugs. It does not work for me. Believe me, I've tried. My job today is not to tell you that you can't drink or use drugs, but from my experience in my story, it was a very slippery slope that I fell down really hard and really fast. I go to therapy. I take my medication as prescribed. I've been on medication since I was around 12 when I first went into therapy, and I have not always taken it correctly. Sometimes I've said, oh, I don't like the way this medication makes me feel, I'm gonna stop taking it. Other times I've said, wow, I really like the way this medication makes me feel if I take 10 times as much as is prescribed to me. I don't mess around with my medication anymore, I just take it the way it's intended to be taken. If I don't like something, if something's not working for me, I talk to my psychiatrist about it. My psychiatrist went to school for, so many years to become a psychiatrist. I don't have any of the skills that he does in medication management. So I rely on him if something's not working. I also do yoga, I go hiking. Those are two physical outlets I love. They don't trigger my over-exercising response. I think we all need physical outlets that we genuinely enjoy. And then I want to take a quick second to talk about that second to last point, connecting with others. You may have noticed that friends didn't play a huge role in my story apart from middle school. That's because I didn't have a lot of friends. Part of that was very legitimately my anxiety, made it hard to make friends. Part of it was also, though, that I distanced myself from people because it was so important to me to keep this mask of perfection on. And I had this idea that if I let people close to me, if I made friends, I would have to reveal that I was not in fact perfect, and I wasn't willing to do that. Today that's not a problem for me. Today I've really embraced my imperfection, my vulnerability, and I let other people into that too, because I know that I'm a human being who's built for connection. We all are. Connections are so, so important for our health on a number of fronts. It's important to me now that the connections I have are genuine ones. They're ones that I feel energized by. They're ones that I make with people who I really respect and who hopefully respect me too. So these are the things I do daily or weekly, regularly, to stay well. Whether or not you can list them all like this, like I can, you all do things to stay well also. Does anyone have anything? You can just shout it out if you want. Something you do regularly to stay well. It can be physically, socially, mentally, whatever. Breathing, yes, very, very good. What'd you say? Drawing, an amazing one, yes. Exactly, and that's again with like connecting with people. That's really a really good one. So you all also probably move throughout your day, right? You also eat regularly, right? We all do all of these things to stay well. Just a couple more minutes, guys. I know, it's really, it's tough. Sometimes our wellness strategies aren't enough, right? Sometimes we get physically sick, and we know that when that happens, we have to change things up. We have to drink more water, get more sleep. Sometimes we go to the doctor, and they might offer us a little extra help. When our mental health isn't great, it doesn't necessarily mean we have a mental illness. It just means we have to, what we're doing regularly isn't working. We need to ramp up what we're doing. For me, this is when I go to my coping skills, some of the things I mentioned before. Challenging my unhelpful thinking is something I do literally every single day. I have that mental tape still. That's still with me. And when I challenge my unhelpful thinking, it's really useful. It helps me put into perspective that mental tape, those oftentimes distorted thoughts. Sometimes I can't do that though, I'm too anxious or whatever, and that's when I reset my body. That's the thing I told you about with like the ice, the cold water. There are other ways of doing that as well. And then something that you all are probably already doing are these things called self-soothing skills. Self-soothing skills allow us to take multiple senses and kind of use them to get grounded in the present moment. It's bringing together these grounding sensory experiences and mindfulness to kind of really center ourselves. My favorite way to do this is taking a walk, a run, a hike with my dog. I'm using almost every sense when I'm outside hiking with her. And I'm able to be really mindful about where I am and about everything that's going on for me. I'm able to be present. So this brings me to my last slide, which is my dog. This is Iris, and I like to show her at the end because I've just been talking at you for a really long time, and I've just been giving you a lot of intense information, personal stories, and just information. And so this is oftentimes like a nice little break for everyone. So if you want to take the next minute, like literally minute, don't start talking and go wild. Just take a minute, stretch, move. You can move your legs, that's totally fine. Think about if you have any questions. It can be about my dog, it can be about what I've shared, it can be about anything. Just one quick minute. All right, so let's come back. We only have a couple more minutes. If you have any questions, you can absolutely ask here. You can also ask anyone in the school, and they can send questions to me, or they can answer to the best of their abilities. Does anyone have any questions they feel like they would like to ask in this venue right now? No pressure at all. Yes? All right.
Does doing all this like increase your anxiety? I feel like it has to have like some effect.
Yeah, like sharing my story. Yeah, no, I am anxious every single time I come up to share my story. But on the whole, it is mostly like therapeutic, it's empowering, it helps me feel like my story has a purpose. It helps me feel like it's helped me, my own mental health to kind of like make connections between all the things that have happened to me. So yes, there's definitely anxiety, but it's not anxiety that's debilitating. It's anxiety I've learned to work through, and on the whole, I get a lot more from it. Yes?
How are your sisters doing?
So many people ask me that, and I realize that I need to start putting them in at the end because like they're still here. They both are living independently, which is great. My youngest sister is a senior in college. My other sister has a job; she's living independently. They both. My youngest sister still deals with all of her medical issues, and that's something she has to be really aware of. She has to be on top of that. She gets support at college for her medical issues, but my middle sister more or less outgrew, I guess, a lot of her things, and she just has a couple remaining issues. But I've been really lucky to be really close with my sisters throughout my whole life. So they're my best friends. I'm really so grateful for them. So that's sort of where we're at with the family stuff. Yes?
What kind of drugs do you use?
That's a question that some people get very curious about. I don't always share that because I don't know that it's super helpful. I don't know that it adds to my story in any way. As I mentioned, I drank a lot and I used illegal stimulants, but beyond that, it's not probably super helpful for me to share the specifics. Yes?
Were you ever afraid of becoming dependent on your anxiety medication?
Yes, I did. That's another drug, I guess, that I did deal with abusing. And so I worked with a psychiatrist who's an addiction psychiatrist to help figure out what was a better option for managing my anxiety. Because yes, I definitely was, I was never nervous about it, but it definitely happened in my life. So working with a psychiatrist who's aware of all my issues has been really, really helpful for me to get on stuff that I can't abuse and that works for me and that I don't feel weird around, about using. Yes?
Do you regret, like, everything that happened, or do you use that, like do you regret it?
Yeah, I don't regret anything. I think that I definitely would have loved to not have dealt with some of the things I did, but I also think that where I am now is a place where I'm meant to be. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely things that if I could do it all over again, I would maybe do differently. I would have asked for help sooner. I would have tried to be more honest with myself, but yeah, I don't regret them. Yeah. Yes?
Is your dog an emotional support animal?
She is. Iris is an emotional support animal. She's in training to become a therapy dog as well because she loves people. I bring her to my 12-step group and she just brings so much joy to them, and so she's in training to be a therapy dog now. She's the greatest thing. Does anyone else have a pet or a dog or yeah? Okay, they're the best, right? I could spend an hour talking about Iris just alone. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. Oh, another dog question? I love it. I love it. Iris is 1.5 years old. She's got I'll say one more thing, and then I want to hear about the resources available at your school. But she has one eye that's blue and one eye that's half brown and half blue, which is really cool. Anyway, if you have any other questions, please feel free to come up and talk to me after. Feel free to connect with someone in your school, but I'm hoping that Ms. Canty can take a few minutes to tell you about the resources available at your school.
Thank you again for sharing your story with us, because I know it's not an easy thing. And I also wish that I had a specific list of resources. I know our counselors and also our school psychologist does have the resources available if you have any questions. And thank you so much. I just want to thank everyone for attending and just listening in and just being the best audience. Thank you so much. And now, we're going to dismiss you guys to go back to your advisories so you can get your things.